Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Gravitas Podcast series, where we explore the trends that are shaping industries today and tomorrow. I'm your host, Ankit Singh, and today we are talking about finance and analytics in quick service restaurant industry, a space that's evolving quickly as brands balance growth, margin pressures, and more complex decision making. To explore this further, today I am joined by Jubin Patel, Vice President of Finance and Insights at Blaze Pizza, who has right been at the center of this QSR evolution. Jubin brings over a decade of experience in finance and analytics, with significant depth in the QSR industry. In his current role as Vice President of Finance and Insights at Blaze Pizza, he partners closely with operations, marketing, and the leadership teams and turns financial insights into real and day to day decision making. Before Blaze, Jubin has held finance and analytics roles in the leading QSR brands, including Papa John's and Focus Brands, where he worked extensively on pricing, unit economics, and performance management at scale. He has also spent time in broader consumer and retail environments, including the Home Depot and the Iron Company, which adds a valuable perspective to how finance supports execution in large and fast moving organizations. That deep experience in QSR and broader operating exposure makes him a great voice for our discussion today. Jubin, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Ankit, I appreciate that amazing background on myself, and I'm excited to be here. Honestly, this is going to be a great conversation with Gravitas. We've worked pretty closely the past year and a half or so, so I'm really excited about this conversation.
Awesome. So, before we jump into specific topics, I want to start at a little higher level for our listeners. When people think about finance, it's often associated with reporting and looking back at the past result. But in practice, finance in QSR industry today goes well beyond that. Across QSRs, finance teams are now deeply involved in business partners as well. So there are influencing pricing, guiding growth decisions, supporting marketing strategies, and helping operations move faster while still maintaining that financial discipline. So when you look back across QSRs today, how do leaders think about finance role in strategic decision making, and how does that show up in your role today?
Yeah, Ankit, that's a great question. The way I think about that question is my role has evolved, and it's never been a core, pure FP&A role, right? I've always tried to find opportunities to partner with operations, partner with marketing, IT, supply chain. And you think about QSR, all these departments integrate really closely. You think about a promotion, it's not just marketing-led promotions, right? Operational execution is important, IT infrastructure is important, and then supply chain partnership is very important. And so where I think of how finance fits into these roles, it's not about the budgeting and forecasting. We're always thought about a 5 year, in some cases, a 10-year performer or model for long term. But I think as we think about, as you stated, it's not about reporting anymore, right? It's about that strategic partner, not just near term, but long term. And so for me and my team, it's all about what's happening now and how it affects the rest of the year and 2 years and 3 years from now, right? So it's not just about the promotions, and you alluded to this, it's about the unit level economics for us, right? So as we think about discounting and value propositions from a marketing and promotion standpoint, it also impacts them near term. But as I think about it, you discount short term, so there could be some short term pain, but long term gain, right? Is how we think about it. And so for me, it's not just the budgeting and forecasting, but it's all the layers that lead into it. And so it's a strategic partner, not so much somebody that's just reporting facts. Basically, to kind of tee it up, it's my team and my role here is to influence kind of just the not just the near term, but the long term, right? It's not about reporting anymore. It's not about looking backwards and talking about what happened in the prior period. It's about the influence of the prior period on the rest of the year, right? And how we think about pivoting, especially in QSR, there's always this evolving pricing strategy, value proposition versus new LTOs and operational execution within the stores and the initiatives we want to run within our kind of our restaurants and all those impacts for the future. So for us, it's not about reporting. It's all about near term, sometimes pain for long term gain, right? That's how we think about it in our team here.
That makes total sense, and that's great to know. And that actually like pivots me well into my next question that I want to ask you. So you mentioned about pricing, promotions, everything that you're actually focusing on right now. So it's a great opportunity for finance to influence multiple levers at once in a QSR industry, including pricing, growth strategies, operations, promotion. So what do you think is the most strategic value added vertical out of this? Like whether it's pricing or maybe promotion or operations?
I think as we think about here, not just at Blaze, but in QSR in general, I think there's pricing and LTO and value propositions right now is kind of at the forefront, right? But there's also operational excellence. So it's not as simple as saying, how do we do on our LTO, but how do we execute on that LTO, right? And I think the way finance supports all of that encompassing is we help drive some of the thought process behind not how which LTO to shape for our calendarization for our restaurants, but what the impact of that LTO is going to be. And then are there other types of promotions that we can do to drive the most incremental sales and growth, right? But then from that piece, it's also COGS and managing margins for our franchisees. So all that layers in, and then partnering with supply chain to ensure that we've got enough lead time to get these types of products and helping them work with our vendors to ensure that we have enough products in the store. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is the operational execution part of it, right? So it's also understanding the feedback that the customers are giving us every time they purchase these products, and then looking at the whole basket and thinking about the opportunities and managing the exceptions, right? So some stores are going to do great, and other stores aren't. So understanding where that shift can be and understanding and isolating certain markets and stores where they might not be performing as well as expected. So it's finance supports from not just a calling out the numbers anymore, but it's really providing the insights into the right level levers to pull now, push and pull, but then in the future, right? As we think about, is this a promotion, operational initiative that we want to continue to progress forward and kind of cycle through the calendar this year and maybe in the next year as well, because it's been so great for us? Or should we pivot early enough so that it doesn't impact the rest of the year and we can kind of come back to the whiteboard and think about another opportunity for us for the rest of the year?
Yep, that sounds great. And actually, I also wanted to talk to about the pricing that we are doing right now. So in today's QSR environment, pricing has become one of the hardest strategic calls. Cost pressures are real, competition is becoming intense, and the customers are far more value aware. Even
Yeah.
a slight pricing increase would actually like have a downstream impact on us. So how do the leaders like you think about pricing trade-off and how you approach it in your role, keeping in mind the inflation, competition, and value-sensitive customers?
Yeah, I think for any QSR brand, there's this barbell strategy, right? Of kind of driving orders and growth in orders, and then driving growth in the basket itself or the ticket, right? So I think between there, it's the strategy of value, as it seems like everyone wants value. I think we all collectively in this call can even say inflation is real, right? And it doesn't matter what side of the kind of scale of income you have, you feel it, everyone feels it right now. So there's this balance between driving value, but then demoting the brand, right? Versus a new LTO, which then drives awareness for the brand. And so for us, I think it's this strategic play of this barbell strategy of there's going to be this kind of always on value proposition because a lot of consumers are looking for that. And then on the other hand, it's kind of this new LTO, new the brand. I think you talked about your questions really leaning into like how do we juggle providing too many discounts, right, without driving incremental sales in orders to offset the margin degradation. And I think there's some work that we do behind the scenes on price elasticity as well of every single scenario to say we at least need at the bare minimum, if we see 100% cannibalization, we're going to have to drive this much incremental sales or orders to offset that margin degradation, right? So that's the first conversation we have with marketing. And then there's a lot of it also goes into testing, right? So I know it's difficult for most QSR brands to really step back and do a test for, a month, 2 months, 3 months. But the reality is sometimes we have to go down that path because we've done that at Focus at Blaze Pizza, where there was a new initiative. We were going to go down the path of launching it for the full system, and as we thought about stepping back and testing it, we realized that it wasn't the right time to do that type of test, right? That type of promotion and that type of manual enhancement. So there's a fine balance of kind of always pivoting because what the customer needs, but then also finding the opportunity to really get some rigor around testing before we launch something. So there's a difficult balance, I think, in QSR because the consumer mindset is constantly changing of what they're wanting now. But then as you think about like the big brands that are really successful, they're testing things long term, and they're thinking about the calendar a year and a half from now, not just 2 months from now. So I think there's a balance between that, but the rigor we put is providing that support with marketing and with operations to really understand the kind of cost benefit analysis, right? To put it simply.
Right. That's a great perspective that you have provided. And just talking about pricing as one side of the equation, the other lever that you talked about was promotions. Often in response to pricing pressure or top line growth, we do some kind of promotions. And as per my understanding, promotions can be very effective in driving traffic, but they can also introduce hidden margin risk if they are not designed
Sure.
tactically. So we would love to know from you, how do finance leaders evaluate whether promotion is actually driving traffic or real growth? And how do you balance this growth with profitability?
Yeah, I think, in a perfect scenario, as I alluded to a little while ago, I think it's a test and learn environment, right? So, A/B testing any new initiatives and scenarios and LTOs that we want to explore. Now that's a perfect world. We don't live in a perfect world, right? We
Right.
want to adapt and change and adjust with the moving environment. And so for us, sometimes it's finding those like items. So you talked about an LTO, right? Let's just say, for us, our biggest item is a build your own pizza, right? 11-inch build your own pizza. So it's understanding how another like item could influence that one specific item. But then now we've got the ability to also inherently look at customers from our tool that we have, which is called Bicky, that can help us identify, um, test and learn without creating that perfect scenario. Because we then know the consumer that bought the new LTO, what did they use to purchase, and how has that changed? And has their average order value shifted? Has their frequency of transactions shifted? And have they shifted in their menu purchases? So in a way, we're able to use these new tool sets that we've brought on to our organization to still be able to provide us a good way to understand the impacts that these new promotions and LTOs have on the sales, the orders, and then as you alluded to the gross margin, right? The impact to the profitability of the restaurants itself.
Yeah. So you just a quick follow-up here. So you mentioned about bringing in tools like Wiki. So when you go into these kind of tools, are there any specific matrices or signals that you rely on to distinguish a good promotion from a margin leaking promotion?
I think in there's a inherent ability to, or not inherent. There's metrics within Bicky that help us understand churn of a consumer, right? So
Right.
first and foremost, it's, are we driving new customers, right? Is this promotion helping? So think about when you talk about consumer analytics, right? Is are they just at the simplest level, are they new customers or existing customers, right? So we try to understand, is this promotion actually driving new trial of new customers into our restaurants that we inherently wouldn't have had, right? So that's one. And we create a baseline, right? So it's not just the consumer that bought it, but it's also relative to our restaurants in general. How many new customers do we generate as a percent of total transactions on a weekly, monthly level relative to how this promotion is performing, and then compare that to prior promotions as well, right? So just as a starting point, it's, are we driving new customers or are we driving a trial from our existing customers? And then once we drive the trial, are they now becoming repeat of this product while it's on an LTO? So that's kind of a starting point. And then it's within our existing base, are we the churn we see consumers that are active customers versus lapsing customers versus consumers that are engaged in the brand. So we have these different metrics and attributes of that consumer profile or life cycle that we can kind of understand and gauge, right? And then it's also the same that used to buy before is again, are they driving more trial, more frequency of this product, becoming more frequent to Blaze Pizza than they were before? And then also, are they also spending more with us from time to time? Is their basket growing, right? So these are some of the metrics that we'll look at in Bicky pretty closely to help us understand because it's not always about, you have a promotion that might drive 5% of your total sales mix versus one that drives 10% of your total sales mix. But it's the opportunity that each one brought, which is, did you drive more new customers that became more engaged at the 5% mix versus the 10%, which is all existing customers that are spending the same, but you have more cannibalization. Right now, you're talking about margin degradation versus the other, which you can have a reduced price point, but then also drive increased margin because it's true incremental margin lift as opposed to cannibalized margin.
That totally makes sense. The other thing that's really changed the pricing and the promotion conversation that we are having here is the channel mix. An order isn't just an order anymore. The economics of it totally depends upon what channel it is coming from. In many
Yeah.
QSR, digital channels and third-party channels have changed the unit economics altogether. So how do leaders like you look at the profitability from these channels perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are in a world, I think all of us on this call at some point or another have ordered something from DoorDash or Uber Eats. I'm a proponent of I only order through them if I get a discount, right? So I'm always their lapsing customer or exited customer because to me, it's a very expensive platform. But a lot of consumers really rely on that platform, right? Most of their spend nowadays, matter of fact, comes from that platform. So that's a third party like a DoorDash and Uber Eats is not a platform that we can get away with, right? It's about how do we manage our existing menu to optimize on those platforms, right? So there's always this partnerships of discounts and promotions that they provide. But it's for us to find, like to your point, the economics around that channel's profitability, right? So what types of promotions we should run on there. We've done an analysis, Ankit, you and myself, actually, matter of fact, that really outlined the types of promotions we should do. Should there be just a simple $5 off of $20 basket versus let's be structured in a BOGO that will drive trial because it's driving awareness versus giving away kind of our biggest menu item, right? And so I think for us, the way we think about channel is really for us, it's always going to be the biggest one is going to be in-store channel, right? That's always going to drive the biggest mix. Inherently, I think about Blaze Pizza as similar to Chipotle or a Cava, but not exactly because there's a lot of offers, right? There's a lot of different toppings. There's a lot of different ways that it's kind of like to me, Chipotle is this clear-cut menu, right? You know exactly what's on there. It doesn't really change, but the vibrant colors and things that you see in a Blaze pizza really will attract you to maybe try something different, right? So I don't think we inherently shift the model and flip it to more digital versus in-house. So I think that stays. But as we think about our digital channel mix and how we grow that, some opportunity to drive more digital transactions within our own business. So then we're not giving this commission to third parties and relying on them to force us to do some kind of marketing campaigns all the time, right? And then for us, having that shift into more our digital channels, own digital channels, will help us drive targeted marketing for our consumers that are shopping different QSR brands. So as we think about it, it's what we've seen is any type of first party drives a larger check for the most part, right? So it's understanding if we can drive a larger check in our own digital channels versus in store and drive a higher profitability margin, not by giving more discounts away because there's similar discounts in store versus our own channels, then that's the path that we would want to take, right? We can't get away from third party, but we definitely want to take some of those customers and bring them back into our own channels as we think about it. And I think that's the right lever for our brand, at least near term.
That's a really thoughtful way of looking at it. So everything we have talked until now, pricing, promotions, channels mix, ultimately depends upon having the right information at the right time. And that actually brings me to one of my favorite topics, data and analytics. So in the QSR space, the difference between good decision and the bad one often isn't intent, it's the visibility.
Yeah.
Across QSR organizations, they are actually investing heavily on data and analytics, but many struggle to convert this data into action. So what separates analytics that actually drives decision from analytics that just looks impressive?
Yeah. You said this is your favorite topic. Obviously, you know me well enough to know that this is one of my favorite topics as well. I think I spend too much on analytics sometimes than I'd like to admit. But look, the reality is in my seat and where I sit, and how my team supports the organization. I think there's got to be a fine balance, right? There's got to be a balance between what we all know the term, right? Analysis paralysis versus getting a good gauge on high level insights to make an informed decision, right? So as we think about, a promotion, we can, dissect that into channels, days, and Blaze Pizza data just as well as I do. Different channels, different days of the week, different day parts, different franchise portfolios, regions, all these other ways we can dissect this data. But at the end of the day, if it's not driving meaningful growth, even from a top line perspective, just high level, then to me, that's time not well spent in finding the opportunity to pivot, right? And so as I think about what are the flags that help us really get insightful enough without going down this deep data analytics path, is let's get enough informed decisions early on to say, is it directionally working and hitting some targets? We know that in most cases, marketing campaigns take two weeks or so on average, right, to really resonate with the consumer. Sometimes quicker, sometimes a little longer, just based on the different media and media partners, things like that. But as we think about the life cycle of the promotion, let's have a check-in week one, obviously, right? And then we have weekly check-ins, but start to make decisions week two, week three, and those decisions really, not sorry, not week two, week three, week three, week five, right? So you kind of look at it the first week, middle, few weeks, and then a month or so, you start to think about, is this the right promotion? If it's a 3-month LTO, that do we want to continue this because we're not seeing the margin increases, right? For me, and the way we think about analytics, everything should layer back into profitability for the restaurant, right? So if you can't ensure that the sales lift that you're getting is not offsetting the margin degradation from the discounts, then right there is added complexity for the restaurants without driving meaningful growth to their bottom line and money to the bank, right? So, from my perspective, it's let's have these check-ins and let's make an informed decision early on, and then we can get detailed as we think about the path for these types of LTOs in the future.
That's really good point. So my questions come from this. You made a point in here saying that we should make a decision early on, but some of people like me who are into data analytics actually wait for perfect data and they miss the window to act. Now, from a finance
Yeah.
and analytics standpoint, I can say that that puts a lot of responsibility on judgment, not just on numbers. So how do you
Yeah.
decide when the insight is strong enough to act versus when it's worth slowing down to get more precision?
Yeah, I think we all deal with that, right? It's like, you think about this amazing story out of Chili's, right? Everyone's raving about their performance for the last 2 years and their sales comps being double digits in 2025 positive, whereas the rest of the QSR more or less felt some pressure throughout the year, right? And so I use that example as one that, for us, it's all about, we're always trying to pivot because there's a new thing that consumers are looking for, right? Especially in the pizza industry, sometimes it gets a little bit longer because we do need to test some of these things. We can't just roll out a good pizza. It's got to be a great pizza, right? Or a great side or a great option for us. But to your point, though, I think there's a fine balance between waiting too long, right? And finding that optimal peak of data consistency that says, yeah, this is perfect. We're going to keep going forward with it. And then versus leveraging our BFAC members, which are basically our franchise portfolio of the kind of top five, right? Sometimes to say, let's have conversations with them, right? Are they feeling any negative feedback or consumer sentiment that we might not be seeing from a data perspective, right? So there's this qualitative and quantitative balance between, like you talked about, being in a data analytics role versus a strategic partner role, which is, is this at least meeting some expectations without really hurting us? If that's the case, then we can at least leverage our partners in the field to give us some feedback from a franchise perspective, or our internal FBCs, which are franchise consultants, to then for them to give us some feedback, right? Or maybe marketing has some, or operations has some. So let's leverage these partners to understand the inconsistencies we're seeing in data really are exactly what the field is seeing as well. So I think there's a balance in a partnership that needs to happen there.
Adds a lot of clarity to what is this complex topic is all about. So now you mentioned about BFAC. So now I want to shift our conversation a little towards franchise and unit level economics, because this is where all the decisions ultimately land. In franchise-based QSR model, strategies that look good at a system level still have to work at an individual operator level on the ground. So
Right.
I have seen in many situations, corporate and franchise priorities don't align always. So how do finance leaders like you think about balancing system-wide strategy with the franchise economics?
Yeah, that we as a franchisor, our responsibility is to help drive growth for our portfolio, for our investors, but then also for our franchise partners, right? So we're not always, there's this saying that I live by, right? Is short-term pain for long-term gain. And I think we've all probably heard that at some point or another in our careers. For us, as a franchisor, that really resonates because we're able to take some of the pain, right, near term because of our balance sheets and cash options that we might have versus a franchisee, especially the mom and pops that only have one unit or two units. We can't expect them to think the same as us, right? So for us, I think the responsibility is their short-term P&L is enough or consistent to what their expectations are, how they plan for their future, how they're putting, food on the table for themselves. I come from a background of my father and my uncle who have had Blimpies, right, in the back. They're a franchisee at one point. And so I understand the pain and the stress that it comes with owning just one restaurant, right? It almost becomes a job, as opposed to some franchise partners have three, four, 5 to 20 restaurants, right? So they can balance those near-term pressures from inflationary pressures to economic pressures, whereas the one to the two location, mom and pop franchisee can't weather the storm the same way, right? So for us, it's a responsibility of making sure that we're at least consistent in what we give them while working in the background to think about the 2 to 5 year growth opportunity for them, right? And for us, it's really growing the top line. Sounds really simple, right? But growing the top line and managing the middle of the P&L for them. And that middle of the P&L is COGS and some labor support from shifting in-store to digital, things like that you talked about earlier on channel profitability, right? So how do we help them reduce costs and then at the same time, at least if not reduce sales, at least grow their AUVs in a meaningful way to offset some economic pressures.
You talked about growing AUVs, but when a store is functioning, and they have just started to function, right? So there are usually like small signals in the beginning that actually tell like whether the store would actually perform well in the future or not. There can be like change in traffic, labor efficiency, or maybe the change in guest behavior. So across QSR, there are early warning signals of underperforming stores, and they are very critical. What indicators do leaders like you pay closest attention to in order to spot those early critical indicators before they actually show up in the P&L?
Yeah, I think it's a two-prong, right? One is, so we have a metric that we look at, which is basically weekly per store averages, right? You're pretty aware of that. And that helps us normalize versus like stores, right? So how much are they doing from a sales perspective? We know how much your labor and COGS percentage should be. You cannot leverage existing labor once you get too small, right? You're going to keep cutting labor, keep cutting labor. What we want is the opposite, where you grow enough where now you're starting to hold labor. So as a percent, it starts to be less, right? So early indicators for us would be, are you starting to hit the mark when it comes to your demographics and the market that you're in and our expectation of what that weekly per store average should be? On average, the first, we all call it the honeymoon phase, in the first 3 months or 4 months is kind of this bounce of sales, right? And then you kind of normalize after you get out of that. On average, what we've seen is about 85% it is your normalized sales relative to that first 3 months, right? And so if you're not hitting, an average of 23 to $27,000 in weekly sales, you're not going to meet the 1.3 to 1.5 million average AUV portfolio that we want out of our stores, right? So that's one indicator. And then the second piece is, pretty early on, we're going to be looking at operational metrics. So if you start to slip on consumer sentiment, Stereotech audits, things like that, that are operational indicators for us, VCR scores, things like that, where we know that your consumers are not going to continue to come back, not because of the promotions and the menu offering, but because of the experiences that they have there, and not even necessarily the price, because they probably would have tried you and maybe found your price okay, but the operational consumer feedback, either cleanliness, friendliness, things like that, aren't hitting the mark. There's a lot of options for consumers right now, right? So they're not going to continue to be a frequent customer with us if you can't deliver on certain type of experiences for them. So it's initial reads on their sales, and then how are they operational perspective. I think that gives a good gauge of, is this on a closure prevention list pretty soon, right? And
Right.
sometimes we just can't do anything about it. There's a lot of times that, in most of all cases, our real estate partners will find the spot for you, validate it. Not necessarily find the spot, but validate that it makes sense for you to put a location there. And then some friends will still put a location or a restaurant where maybe we haven't completely provided the support, but they think that, it's the right move because of gentrification and things like that that's happening. Now, if that doesn't pan out, then that's a risk that they took, right? And we've seen that happen from time to time.
That totally makes sense. And you actually mentioned initially in the conversation that labor is one of the most valuable indicator that you would actually look at over the period of time. And labor it tends to be the most dynamic lever according to me as well, because it is affected by traffic pattern, wage pressures, scheduling decisions, and service expectations as well. And what makes labor specifically very complex is that it is directly tied to the guest experience. So how does a finance leader like you think about optimizing labor while still protecting the guest experience?
Yeah, it's a good question because, from a finance perspective, the one thing that we look at on the P&L to either cut are usually marketing spends or labor costs, right? When we look at the full P&L. But the reality is, I kind of sway away from that a little bit, especially on the labor side. I think an organization like ours will always have a larger labor percent as a percent of total sales than most organizations do, right? Especially when we have in store, if 70% of our transactions are happening with somebody walking the line, you need somebody focused on providing the right level of customer experience, right? But if you think about our line, you've got all these different the points throughout the line, plus the pizza smith, plus the expo person, plus somebody at the POS. There's a lot of moving people within the line, even for just one order, right? You could have 4 touch points for just one pizza, for different labor touch points, right? So from my perspective, it's this activity-based labor model, right? So we don't look at the labor model that we built out isn't based on net sales as a percent, or labor cost as a percent of net sales, because that's not an activity-based model, right? The way we built it out, um, static versus fluid hours. So static hours being ones that we know we have to have based on transactions, based on items per order, based on fast fired items, things like that. And the model that we built out is, if you have this many orders per hour, you need this many people, because it doesn't matter what size store you are. you need this many touch points, right? If you have, just imagine if you have two people ordering at different times, not together as one party, then you need somebody to start the dough process. You need somebody to start the veggies or the saucing, the veggies, the meat, somebody to put it in the oven. And then pizza the exo smith is basically somebody that will cut it and add some drizzles on top. And then you got to have somebody to check them out as well, right? So if you have two different pizza orders, you still need 4 or 5 people, right, to manage that order. And so for us, it's all about activity based and not so much just a percent on a P&L as we think about labor. And I think it's really important. One of our biggest franchisees uh, uh, has made a statement to me and really has resonated. And their statement is, you don't staff for the now, you staff for the future. And so as you think about what you want your future AUVs to look like, staff accordingly. Don't staff for the $1.2 million AUV you're at right now. If you want to get to a 1.8, staff for that and the sales will follow, more or less.
That's a great way to think about it from a leadership standpoint. And I do agree that labor is a cost lever that can be adjusted in real time. But I want to talk to you about food cost. Food cost is a different challenge altogether. They're influenced by commodity markets, supplier relationship, and broader supply chain dynamics. And that makes planning and resilience especially important in the food cost. So how do you actually build that resilience into financial models so that the businesses can absorb the swing of supply chain constantly without reacting?
Yeah, that's a really good topic from labor, right? Is that's the two biggest pieces of our P&L, as most QSR, is going to be that ours is slightly shifted a little bit, right, than most QSR. Our labor is actually more expensive than our food costs, where in some places the food cost is actually more expensive than the labor. But all in all, the way we manage food costs and the shifts in commodity prices, inflationary pressures, tariffs, things like that. Luckily, we're not as impacted as much by tariffs, which is good for us. But the one thing that we did when we first got on was built a COGS model that we never had at Blaze Pizza, right? So it's really the way that model works is it's built off of the ingredients of every single item that we sell, right? That needs to be fast fired, and then the build of it. And so the build, the ingredients lean into the build. So it's every single item, right? How many ounces of things go into it? How much water you're going to need? How much dough you're going to need? Even for our BYOs, right? We've made assumptions around what toppings usually go on a BY. And so I lean into that because that's become our tool as a negotiation opportunity for our supply chain leaders to say, we are potentially seeing an increase on these items or this. So cheese and sauce is essentially our kind of our biggest pieces, right? Our biggest cost components on our COGS. And so anytime there's a negotiation that comes up, it's really using this COGS model to determine the impact it's going to have on the full P&L, right? Because sometimes rightfully so, they might sound alarmed, right? And say, hey, we're going to see, I'm making this up, but olives are going to go up by 20%. God, this is going to ruin our P&L, this and that. But the reality is we don't use that many olives, right? As an example. And so we'll run that through the model. That 15% seems aggressive, but really it's maybe 10 basis points to the total COGS percent or less, maybe 5 basis points. So as we think about that, right, it's really taking the feedback we get from supply chain leaders to really influence the total impact to a store's P&L. And what we'll do is we'll run it through the model and then provide leadership like our CEO, John, the feedback of what does this mean on average per store on an annualized basis, right? And on their P&L. So that's kind of, it doesn't necessarily say how we manage COGS, but it's a great way for us to help influence decision making when it comes to food costs.
That sounds amazing. So, a lot of decisions that we have discussed so far around pricing, labor, food cost are increasingly being supported by technology. And of course, more recently, AI is becoming a major part of the conversation in QSRs as well. So, there's a
Yeah,
lot of excitement around it, but there's a lot of noise as well. So,
yeah.
according to you, how should a finance leader think about AI adoption, and where do you see the real practical value emerging?
Yeah, I think it's twofold from our perspective, right? It's one, we need to think strategically long term on the influence we want to have we want to have from AI on our business as a whole, right? We've got two different levers. We have the unit level economics for our restaurants and supporting them from an AI perspective, and then we have the corporate side. And a data analytics perspective, partnering with tools like Bicky or our media agencies and helping use AI to influence some of those things, right? But for us, it's one, there's no getting away from AI, right? It's the most exciting thing. Everyone wants to do it, everyone wants to try it. But there's a lot of hesitation and reservation when it comes to me and how I think about adapting it or adopting it, because it's got to be a long-term strategy, right? Because every time I look up, I'll just give you a perfect example, building decks, right? Or sorry, PowerPoint slides. Building that out. There's a new tool that comes out every 2 months that says, oh, we can build decks faster. I'm sure you guys have used most of them and Gravitas as well, potentially. But there's always this emerging new tool, right? So for us, it's one, budgeting for the type of money that we're going to need to influence the organization, and then figuring out the ROI, right? Of, we set aside $100,000. How do we expect that to influence the business, right? And then what is going to be the biggest impact for us is going to be helping influence our franchisees and helping them grow, because then that puts more dollars into our bank. Then that can help, rotate that money back into the kind of AI initiatives for us. So the way I answer that is, we need to do it. There's no way around that. It's really exciting. We want to adopt it in all different ways. You guys know that we've already started adopting it in some ways. And then it's really thinking consciously about how do we want it to influence the future of Blaze Pizza, not just the present, and like really starting to create a roadmap around that. And a lot of it's honestly, it's cleaning up data, right? Like, Blaze Pizza, for the last year and a half that I've been here, we've been building a data warehouse like that. We should have, most QSR brands already have a great data warehouse that they're now using to influence their AI strategies. We've now got a great, baseline for that. Now it's building on that, but it's really a long-term kind of crawl, walk, run process in my head, as opposed to, well, let's just go find the best tool and then let's go do this and let's go invest this. It's really thinking it more strategically. And really, I think, in my perspective, it has to be the most money spent has to be influencing future growth for Blaze Pizza. And I think a lot of it has to do with supporting our franchise partners.
Well, that makes sense. AI actually looks very interesting, but we need to invest in it very strategically. So,
Yeah.
listening to this conversation, it's clear that finance in QSR is no longer just about managing the present. It's increasingly about helping organizations anticipate what's coming next, whether that's a shift in consumer behavior, cost structure, or maybe technology. With that in mind, I want you to look ahead a little. And when you think about the next 3 or 5 years of finance in QSR industry, like how do you see it shaping the QSR?
AI in specific,
Yep.
um, that's a I've got a lot of thoughts on it. I think first and foremost, I think how it influences QSR in multiple different ways, right? One is, I mean, I can think about AI agents scrubbing all our competitors plus consumer sentiment data points to help us identify the right LTO value proposition and pricing of our menu, right? That's one example. An example is supply chain, right? Helping influence supply chain, and there's different cost measures and different cost components coming up. Do we now use that in the changes that are happening to then also influence our LTOs and promotions, right? Because we think cheaper things are coming up on the horizon. Maybe that helps influence it. I think from a data analytics perspective, it could reshape the way we all look at data and how much time we spend, us on our team, on in SQL and Snowflake writing query and data, as opposed to really strategically having data at our fingerprints, asking an AI agent questions, and then having that influence the business, right? And then I think from my perspective, it's, I'm not building, budgets and forecasts. I'm having an AI agent build this out, and then we're scenario planning, right, for the next 3 to 5 years. I think another example is labor optimization and demand planning for our locations, right? Most of our small one store, two store mom and pops aren't sophisticated to really, let alone have a really strong P&L management, month end review versus managing how much they're pretty most of them you'll be surprised. They're pretty sophisticated and having good pulse on the sales that they've been doing yesterday, day before this, but not really understanding the puts and takes of that sales line, right? Which channel, which day part, all these other things. So then can we help an AI agent help them demand plan, right? A tool that they have to say, hey, the next 2 weeks, your sales are going to likely look like this. Let me create a schedule for your workforce to optimize labor, right? And then optimize your food costs, waste, all these different things, your local restaurant marketing. Let me help you build out the different, assets to help provide to your agency partners at the local level or flyers, or let me map out. I'm just kind of spitballing here to all the different things that come to my mind, right? But let me map out the different organizations in your area that are most likely to do catering orders with you, right? All these different things to build relationships. So, and then there's a whole other piece where I think for a long time, consumers, we've gotten away from trying to call a location to place an order, right? What if an AI agent, I got away from that because as a consumer, it wasn't seamless anymore, right? I'm getting somebody that's in a different country that doesn't really understand the menu, but from a cost-cutting perspective, the brand decided to go to that country, right? And they're not really helpful, so they're then leaning away from that. So what if you had an AI agent that I could text and communicate with and say, I want my last order that I did, or give me some recommendations, all these other things. But I think from a QSR perspective, it will change the way we think about every single position, every touch point, from supply chain to the units as a whole, as a restaurant as a whole, to how we think about it at the corporate level as well.
That's a great way to look about it. And Jubin, this has been a really insightful conversation for us. So to close this out, I want to bring back the fundamentals. Finance and analytics teams in QSRs are being asked to support growth, profit margin, and enable better decision all at once. So if you had to narrow it down, what is the single most important capability that finance and analytics teams in the QSR should focus on building to be effective over long term?
Yeah. I think a traditional finance role no longer exists, right? So if you are a true FP&A budgeting forecasting analyst, manager, director, VP, I think that role is starting to shift pretty quickly, right? We no longer are, um, you know, I know accounting really looks in the rear view and we're supposed to look, in the front, but that's not just from a budgeting standpoint, right? It's the partnership that we provide. And so I think a lot of it also comes from the skill set of data analytics. And so I try to consume as much technical background and experience. And I kind of alluded to that early in the call. It's probably more than I should in my role. But I think that's the future, right? It's how do we leverage analytics in our roles to become more thoughtful, strategic partners that are using data as a way to validate and influence the future, right? Because sometimes we get a lot of data points from different partners that if you're not an analytics person, you can't validate it. You kind of just have to say it makes sense. But what happens a lot more than often is there can be inherent biases, right? From who's providing you that data point. And so it's for us to provide that path to is it working and should this be the future? And then should we be think about different scenarios in our forecast and budget? So it's a blend of true analytics, AI adoption, and not getting rid of the core FP&A tasks as well, which is the forecasting budgeting, right? I think that really analytics and AI is super sexy right now, right? Nobody can get away from that. Everyone loves it. But at the same point, you can't dive too deep into it and lose focus on the impact on the P&L and the budget and the forecast for the year and the next 5 years. So I think it's bridging that gap.
Well, that's a great perspective. Thank you so much for sharing such an insightful thought and practical perspective. Having had opportunity to work alongside you, I know how much rigor and judgment goes into these kind of decisions. So I'm sure that our listeners have found it very valuable.
Yeah,
Thank you so
I,
much, Urban.
Hey,
I
Jubin,
appreciate that. Good.
before we all,
It's
so first of all, thank you. This was super insightful. And before you go, tell us about, obviously, besides Blaze Pizza, or including Blaze Pizza, what are your top three favorite QSR brands? What do you like about them the most? And if they're listening
Yeah.
to this podcast, what's the one suggestion you might have for them?
I'll start with the suggestion first. I've been in QSR cumulative probably about 8 years or so, right? With Focus Brands, 3 years, and then 3.5 years, and then I kind of left, went back to kind of retail, and then Papa John's for a couple of years, and now here at Blaze for a couple of years. I think what I've seen is we get wound up too much in the analytics piece of it, and diving too deep into it sometimes. I think, Ankit, you and myself had that conversation right early on, which is that fine balance between analytics and making a decision. And I sometimes, it could be marketing, it could be operation, it could be supply chain, or even our finance leaders, right? They will ask a little bit more than it's necessary to make a decision. And I think sometimes we just have to step back and say, um, you know, away from the data analysis paralysis. I think that would be my thing is, can I get more? Can I get this? And no, you've got enough to make a decision. Let's make a decision. And if you can't, then we've got to find a different path. So for me, that would be some of my feedback as leaders in some of these roles. And I think about my favorite brands. I think Dave's Hot Chicken's on everyone's mind. I've never tried it, so I can't say it's my favorite brand, but it's on top of mind. And how are they building so much excitement around that brand, right? How do we leverage some of that? Because it's hot chicken, like it's spicy chicken. That's such a niche that they've just created this amazing flair around that. I think we can all learn from. And then I think about other QSR brands. I'd be remiss if I didn't say I like Papa John's as the leading national pizza brand, right? That's probably one of my favorite pizzas. But outside of Blaze, those two, and then Kava's amazing. Like I like Kava. I think it's again a niche brand, so I'm curiously looking at them to see how long this growth path lasts for them. And not in a bad way. I'm just curious because again, it's such a niche brand that, do they lose that momentum that they have right now? I'm just curiously watching them as well. So I think those are my brands that I would that come top of mind for that question. Couple.
I love that you highlighted the importance of making or acting on information to make decisions and quickly learning from them and then making adjustments versus just over
Yeah.
analyzing and getting into analysis paralysis. Couldn't agree more. And
Yeah, I think
data is
to your point, I think like to summarize, it's like speed versus precision, right? Like where do you find that balance, right? It doesn't always have to be every detail, look under every stone, no stone unturned, like there's a lot of information you can glean pretty quickly.
and that's also true, and maybe that sets apart some of these more leaner, agile, fast growing brands like Dave's
Yeah,
Hot Chicken versus a giant like a Subway, right? Even if you
yeah,
look at their website, the whole social media experience, they're catching on to trends and cashing on trends fairly
yeah.
quickly versus the Subways or the bigger national level brands. I think they're a bit dated or they play it safe
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, I think, and we can't get away from the operational excellence, right? Like, I think a lot of brands that grow really fast, like I'll give Kava as a great example. I joke that I think I've created this acronym and nobody's really caught on to it yet, but I'm is QSC, right? Quality, service, consistency. So if you look at every single brand that are leading brands like a Chick-fil-A or a Chipotle, Chick-fil-A is expensive. Like I think if you guys have all eaten at Chick-fil-A, it's not cheap, but their quality is amazing, their service is great, and they're consistent at both of those things. So you know what you're getting. Their app is amazing. They're great at targeted marketing. You look at Chipotle, in my opinion, quality is great. Service is awful. I hate going to the Chipotle, but they're consistent at these things. I know what I'm getting, the price point, and like I don't have to question how long it's going to take me in a Chipotle and the how they've triggered that in my brain. I think about Chipotle than any other brand every single time I think about a quick lunch because I'm like, this can be fast. I like the food and I know it's consistent. The last piece I'll say as kind of additional data points is like, again, operational excellence is really important for me. And one thing that my current boss, Darren, you know him pretty well. The one thing that he's taught me is this don't mistake effort with results, right? Because there's a lot of brands that do a lot of work around analytics and this and that and like understanding the different menu mix analysis and all that. But if it's not driving results, you're not driving growth, you're not driving profitability, then you're kind of wasting time, right? To an extent, unless it does in the future, then that's great. But if not, you're just kind of doing a job, right? You're not this entrepreneurial spirit that should be thinking about it from the perspective of the franchisee.
I think we should definitely add QSC to the three-letter acronyms that the QSR
Well,
industry
it's
loves.
recorded here, so I know
You
I
said it
created
first.
that
You
acronym.
heard it first from Jubin. But I agree, it's quality, service, and consistency, and it resonates with the examples, even Starbucks, right? So it's a
Yeah.
quality, it's a consistency of the product, consistency of the
Yep.
experience, and the service is great.
Yeah.
I've eaten more often at Chick-fil-A than Dave's Hot Chicken, but I will tell you Dave's Hot Chicken is even more expensive than Chick-fil-A. So,
That's what I'm
but
saying. It's
people are
so
spending,
crazy.
people
Yeah.
are paying premium for that.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, right? Is I don't think consumers are afraid to pay a premium for something they want. Now, you might not get the same frequency, right, of that consumer to come to you every time. But again, like a kava to me, the quality is good. They're not consistent in my experience every time I go there. Their service is kind of lackluster, and it's kind of confusing because every time I'm trying to look at the what drizzles can I put on it and all these other things. So that's why I'm like watching that brand really closely to say I don't think they're a Chipotle. Like we've all tried to emulate that, and I think they were a unicorn for a while where they just continue to grow and their unit growth has been amazing. But then what do their comps start to look like is what I'm really curious about.